In this video, we're going to cover Java JSON data binding. All right, so what exactly is data binding? So data binding is the process of converting JSON data to a Java POJO. So we're starting over here on the left with JSON data, and then we have our Java POJO. And so we can use data binding to convert from JSON over to a Java POJO. So it'll read the contents of that JSON string or file and then populate the Java object with that given data. Or you can go the other way. You can start with the Java POJO and then send it down to an actual JSON string or JSON file. Now, this whole process is called data binding. Now, you may hear other terms used online or see other terms used online, such as mapping, serialization, deserialization, marshalling, unmarshalling. It's pretty much all the same thing. It's just basically converting from one format to another. So converting from JSON to a Java POJO or going from a Java POJO to JSON. And remember, Java POJO is really just plain old Java object or any old Java class. Let's look at doing JSON data binding with Json. So Spring actually uses the Json project behind the scenes. So Json handles the data binding between JSON and the Java POJO. So Json is actually a separate project. There's a lot of synergy between Json and Spring, but Jackson's a separate project for doing data binding. So they have support for doing data binding with XML, support for data binding using JSON, and so on. So it's a very popular project. So if you do any type of JSON development in the Java world or any REST development in the Java world, it's a very good chance you're going to run across the Json project. It's very popular. That's why we're covering it here in this course. Now, by default, Json will call the appropriate getter-setter methods when it handles the conversion. So if you're converting from JSON to POJO, it'll call a given setter methods. When you go from POJO to JSON, it'll call the getter methods. And let's kind of walk through this here with an example. So here on the left-hand side, I have this JSON object for ID, first name, last name, and active. And then over on the right-hand side, I have this Java POJO for a student. And so what'll happen here is that we'll actually do the conversion between JSON going to a Java POJO or starting with the Java POJO like a student object and then actually sending it down to a JSON string. So Json can help us with all of this processing. And again, the important thing here is that it'll actually use the getter and setter methods for handling some of this processing. And we'll kind of dig into it a bit more here. So let's look at one scenario. So the one scenario that we'll look at here is converting JSON to Java POJO. So in this scenario, they'll actually call the setter methods on the POJO. All right, let's kind of step through it here. So we have this JSON over on the left-hand side for ID, first name, and last name, and active. And then over on the right-hand side, we have our Java POJO for a student. So basically, using Json, they'll actually call the setter methods on your POJO. So again, going from JSON to Java POJO, they're going to call the setter methods. So they'll call set ID, set first name, set last name, set active based on whatever values that you have here in the JSON. And so Json will actually do all of this work for you behind the scenes once we get everything set up. And we'll cover all the coding for setting this up here in this video. All right, so let's kind of dig in a little deeper here. So converting JSON to Java POJO. So remember, I said it's going to call the setter methods on the POJO. So starting over here on the left-hand side with this JSON object, then we have this POJO. Again, plain old Java class, student. We have some fields defined, and we have the getter-setter methods. So the important thing here, again, is that Jackson's going to call the setter methods on the POJO. So for ID, they're going to call set ID. All right, and so Json will actually do this work for you. For first name, it's going to call set first name. For last name, it's going to call set last name. And for active, it's going to call set active. So you see the pattern here, right? They basically use the name from the actual JSON. They call set. They take the first character of that name, make it cap, and then use that to make the actual method call. Now, again, I really want to emphasize here, Json calls the setter method. So it doesn't access any of the internal private fields directly on the POJO. It'll only call the given setter methods. So you have to make sure that you have those setter methods defined. And in this case, making sure that they match up accordingly for this given example. So hopefully you can kind of see the power of Json doing all the heavy lifting for you in the background and handling all the data binding for your application. Now let's go the other direction. So here we're going to convert a Java POJO to JSON. And so in this scenario, Jackson's going to call the getter methods on the POJO. All right, so starting over on the left-hand side with this Java POJO for student, and then we'll actually send this data over to JSON, or actually generate the JSON based on this. And so again, Jackson's going to call the appropriate getter methods on your POJO, and then Jackson will handle getting this data sent out accordingly to a JSON string, either to just in memory or to a given file. Again, Jackson will do all this work for you. Now let's look at the Spring and Json support. So when you're building Spring REST applications, Spring will automatically handle the Json integration. So any JSON data that's being passed to the REST controller is automatically converted to a POJO. And also any Java object that's being returned from a REST controller is converted to JSON using the Json project. And again, all of this happens automatically behind the scenes thanks to the integration between Spring and Json.